afternoon and welcome to the World News Review on Independent Television Abuja. I am Nkiru Obuli. Starting off, the Russian European Union ambassador has said that Russia has nothing to do with the nerve agent poisoning of a former spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter Yulia. He also suggested that a UK research lab could be the source of the nerve agent used in the attack. For more on foreign news, let's join Gabriel Kuma.
Russia's EU ambassador suggested that a UK research laboratory could be the source of the nerve agent used in the attack on an ex-spy and his daughter. Vladimir Chizov told reporters that Russia had nothing to do with the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. He said Russia did not stockpile the poison and that the Porting Down lab was only 12 kilometers from the city. The UK Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson described the claims as satirical. Still in Russia, Russians are voting in an election that is likely to return Vladimir Putin for a fourth term as president. Voting began in the Russian Far East on Saturday and opened in Moscow 9 hours later. More than 100 million people are eligible to vote. Mr. Putin is hoping for another 6-year term and faces 7 other candidates. He said he would see as a success any result that gave him the right to perform the duties of president. His comments were carried on national TV as he voted in Moscow. Mr. Putin's rivals include a millionaire communist, Pavel Grandinin, a former reality TV host, Ksenia Sobchak, the veteran nationalist Vladimir Zhirinovsky. U.S. media says ex-FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe has given memos about conversations he had with President Donald Trump to an inquiry into alleged Russian meddling in the 2016 election. The memos could support claims that Mr. Trump sought to obstruct justice. Mr. McCabe was fired from the FBI on Friday. Mr. Trump had accused him of bias and said on Sunday Mr. McCabe had never taken note when the two met. The president has also dismissed the Russian investigation as a witch hunt. The investigation is led by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, himself a former FBI director. He has so far indicted 19 people. Turkish-backed forces have taken full control of the center of the Syrian Kurdish city of Afrin. Fighters waved flags and tore down the statue of a legendary Kurdish figure after claiming the city center on Sunday. The 2-month Turkish-led operation aimed to rid the border region of a Kurdish militia that Turkey considers a terrorist group. Activists say 280 civilians have died, although this is denied by Ankara. Earlier, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced that units of the Free Syrian Army took control of the center of Afrin. Operations continued on Sunday to clear mines and remaining Kurdish resistance everywhere in Afrin. Pictures and video footage emerged of forces tearing down a Kurdish statue with a bulldozer. The moment depicts the blacksmith Kawa, a legendary figure of Kurds.
The former South African President Jacob Zuma's son, Edward, on Monday defended his father, who is facing criminal charges, saying he has been victimized for calling for expropriation of land. Let's join Juliet Angiwa for this and more on the foreign scene.
The former South African President Jacob Zuma's son, Edward, on Monday defended his father, who is facing criminal charges, saying he's been victimized for calling for expropriation of land. He issued a statement on Monday saying his father is being persecuted for fighting the white monopoly capital in the country. On Friday, the National Prosecuting Authority said they will charge the former president for corruption, money laundering and racketeering. He also said the former president was being targeted for speaking out in support of radical economic transformation and expropriation of land without compensation. Edward said his father was fighting for the poor in the country. He also vowed to defend his father. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has released the names of hundreds of companies and individuals who failed to return $827 million illegally stashed abroad despite an amnesty. After taking office last year, Mr. Mnangagwa gave individuals and companies 90 days to give up the funds. He said on Monday it has resulted in $591 million being returned, less than half the funds believed to be held abroad. He also warned that those who fail to comply are at the risk of prosecution. Mr. Mnangagwa, who promised to crack down on corruption after being sworn in office last year, said he had been left without no choice but to release the 1,800 names, which include manufacturers, miners, small businesses, state-owned entities, and even churches. The European Union offered unqualified solidarity with Britain on Monday over a nav agent attack blamed on Russia, as international weapons expert visited to take a sample of the chemical for testing. In a joint statement, EU foreign ministers said they took extremely seriously Britain's claims that Moscow was behind the attack on a former Russian double agent in the English city of Salisbury. The European Union expresses its unqualified solidarity with the UK and its support, including for the UK's effort to bring those responsible for this crime to justice. President Vladimir Putin has dismissed the claim of Russian state action as complete drivel, rubbish and nonsense. On Monday, his spokesman Dmitry Peskov warned Britain to prove Russia's involvement or apologize.
The European Court of Human Rights has rejected a request to find that men detained during internment in the Northern Ireland suffered torture. The so-called hooded men claimed they were subjected to torture by the army in 1971. Lawyers for the men have called on the Irish government to appeal. In 1978, the European Court of Human Rights held that the UK had carried out inhuman and degrading treatment. However, the court fell short of defining this treatment as torture. In 2014, the Irish government said it would ask the European Court to reverse this judgment. The 14 hooded men alleged they were subjected to torture sanctioned by the state. They said they were forced to listen to constant loud static noise, deprived of sleep, food and water, forced to stand in a stressed position and beaten if they fell. The men also said they were hooded and thrown to the ground from helicopters. Despite being at near ground level, they had been told they were hundreds of feet in the air. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been taken into custody for questioning over allegations that he received campaign funding from the late Libyan leader, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Police are investigating alleged irregularities over the financing of his 2007 presidential campaign. Police have questioned him previously as part of the probe. Mr. Sarkozy has denied any wrongdoing. The center-right politician failed to return to power in 2012. Judicial sources say he was being questioned in Nanterre, a suburb in western Paris. 2013, France opened an investigation into allegations that his campaign had benefited from illicit funds from Gaddafi. India has confirmed the deaths of 39 construction workers kidnapped by Islamic State militants in Iraq. Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj said the DNA of 38 workers matched with the bodies found in a mass grave. Since the kidnapping in Mosul in 2014, the Indian government had always maintained that they were alive. India was engaged in prolonged effort for their release and even sought Iraq's help in locating them after Mosul was recaptured last year. Ms. Swaraj added that it was highly likely that the body of the 39 worker had also been found, but she said it was a 70% match. She confirmed the death while speaking in the Rajya Sabha Upper House of Parliament on Tuesday. Last year, Ms. Swaraj had told Parliament that there were no evidence that the workers had been killed by the Islamic State militants. 31 of those abducted were from the northern Indian state of Punjab, while the others came from Himachal Pradesh and Bihar in the north and West Bengal in the east. An airstrike had reportedly killed 15 children and 2 women sheltering in an underground school in Syria's besieged rebel-held eastern Ghouta. Rescuers said civilians had been hiding in the school to escape government and Russian raid on the town of Afrin. More than 1,400 civilians are believed to have been killed since government forces stepped up its offensive on the enclave outside Damascus a month ago. At least 50,000 civilians have fled the siege in the past week. The exodus came after soldiers and allied militiamen drove rebel forces out of about 65% of the region, cutting it into 3 pockets. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Monitoring Group reported that 3 missiles hit the underground school in Afrin, which is in the southern pocket controlled by Faylaq al-Rahman rebel group. A 16-year-old boy has rejected an appointed role as Deputy Commissioner of a regional state in Somalia because of security fear. Let's join Gabriel Kuma for this and other stories on the foreign scene.
A 16-year-old boy has rejected an appointed role as Deputy Commissioner of a regional state in Somalia because of security fears. Faisal Abdullahi Omar was to take up the role in Johar, the headquarters of the southeastern state of Hill-Shaban. According to reports, the high school student said he feared the role would make him a target of Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab. Omar says he was not consulted about the appointment, which is made by Somali clan leaders, and he wanted to instead focus on his studies. Omar's parents also had reservations about the appointment, but others in the community told him that it would be an opportunity to be a role model to the youngsters. An airstrike has reportedly killed 15 children and 2 women sheltering in an underground school in Syria's besieged rebel-held eastern Ghouta region. Rescuers said civilians had been hiding in the school to escape government and Russian raids in the town of Afrin. More than 1,400 civilians are believed to have been killed since government forces stepped up an offensive on the enclave outside Damascus a month ago. At least 50,000 civilians have fled the siege in the past week. The exodus came after soldiers and allied militiamen drove rebel forces out of about 65% of the region, cutting it into 3 pockets. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Monitoring Group reported that 3 missiles hit the underground school in Afrin, which is in the southern pocket controlled by the Faylaq al-Rahman rebel group. Russian diplomats and their families are preparing to leave the UK after being expelled over the Salisbury spy attack. Removal vans and diplomatic cars have been leaving the embassy in London. The UK expelled 23 diplomats after Prime Minister Theresa May said Russia was culpable for the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter. The government will decide whether to impose further sanctions on Russia. Mrs. May is chairing a meeting of the National Security Council. Moscow has denied all involvement and is expelling 23 British diplomats in response. The UK diplomats have until Saturday to leave Russia. The Kremlin is also closing down both of the British Council in Russia, which promotes cultural ties between the nations, and the consulate in St. Petersburg. Police in the U.S. state of Maryland are responding to reports of several people shot at a high school. Gunfire was reported on Tuesday morning at Great Mills High School in St. Mary's County, about 104 kilometers southeast of Washington, D.C. St. Mary's County Sheriff's Office says the incident has been contained. Some 1,600 students attend the school in the community of Great Mills. It comes a month after high school shooter killed 17 in Parkland, Florida. According to reports, 3 people have suffered gunshot wounds, are being treated in hospitals.
A suspect linked with a series of bomb puzzles and suspected of targeting Austin, Texas, died after detonating an explosive device. For this and other stories, let's join Lulu Odu.
A suspect linked with a series of deadly parcel bombs targeting Austin, Texas, is dead after a major police operation. The suspect was killed after detonating a device when officers approached his car off an interstate highway in the Round Rock area of the state capital. FBI agents are reportedly carrying out an investigation at the scene. The incident follows 4 bomb attacks in Austin, the state capital, and one in Czech, 65 miles south. Late on Tuesday, the Austin Police Department used footage from a FedEx store on Brody Lane in South Austin to identify the suspect. In the early hours of Wednesday, police and federal officers then took up positions around a parking area belonging to a hotel in Round Rock. As they waited for tactical teams to arrive, the vehicle started to drive away, forcing officers to pursue it. When the vehicle eventually pulled over, armed officers approached, but the suspect then detonated a bomb, injuring one officer and causing another to open fire. Police later confirmed that it was the blast that killed the suspect, who they said could not be named until he was positively identified and the next of kin had been informed. At least 29 people have been killed and 52 wounded in a suspected suicide bomb attack near a shrine in the Afghan capital, Kabul. Initial reports suggest the bomber attacked a crowd of hundreds of people who had gathered to celebrate the start of Nowruz, the New Year's festival. According to reports, many of the crowd were minority Shia. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Sectarian attacks on Shias have increased in recent years. An Interior Ministry spokesman told newsmen that a suicide attacker approached the shrine on foot and detonated his explosives when identified by police. The blast occurred outside Ali Abad Hospital, close to Kabul University in the west of the city. The shrine has been attacked before. At least 14 people were killed in October 2016 as Shia Muslims prepared for a religious day of mourning during the festival of Ashura. A bombing in 2011 killed at least 59. Families of 39 Indians who were killed by the Islamic State group in Iraq say they only found out about their deaths when they were announced on television. Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj told Parliament that DNA tests proved the 39 men who were kidnapped by IS in Mosul in 2014 had died. Opposition parties say the government must apologize. Families of victims say the government always said they were alive and efforts were being made to bring them back. 31 of those killed were from the northern state of Punjab. When Mr. Singh got an opportunity to go to Iraq in 2011, his family was concerned about the ongoing war, but he convinced them that he would be fine because the unrest was far from Mosul, where he would be working. After Mr. Singh went missing in 2014, his son, now 7, often asked his mother. Until a few months ago, when the government asked for DNA samples, she said she first heard about her husband's death from villagers who had seen it on television.
To some African stories, officials Thursday said Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa has pardoned at least 3,000 prisoners to clear out overpopulated jails. The pardon will see the release of all female prisoners except those serving life sentences, as well as all disabled and juvenile prisoners, terminally ill prisoners, and those above age 60 who have served a third of their time will also be freed. The statement also announced that prisoners in death row for more than 10 years will not face death penalty but will spend life in jail. The country last executed a prisoner in 2005, and Mnangagwa is a strong opponent of the death penalty. Still in Africa, a refugee agency has warned that another 1 million people are at the risk of starvation in South Sudan in the next 3 months, adding to the more than 6 million people already starving in the world's youngest state. The Norwegian Refugee Council said the worst affected areas are those which suffer most from armed conflict. The group warned that the food crisis had been aggravated by the effects of the 4-year civil war. The government has been accused of preventing relief food from reaching some areas, while in others, fearful farmers have stayed away from their fields, which has significantly decreased domestic food production. The Norwegian Refugee Council says the current level of aid to South Sudan only reaches fewer than half of the people who need it. British Prime Minister Theresa May Thursday sought to unite EU leaders in condemning Moscow over the poisoning of a former Russian spy, but she faces resistance from states keen to protect their Kremlin ties. May is expected to brief her colleagues at a Brussels summit on the progress of the investigation into the attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in the English city of Salisbury using a deadly Soviet-developed nerve agent. While the United States, France and Germany have swung behind London, saying they accept the UK's assessment that the Russian state is the only possible culprit, other EU countries with close ties to Moscow, notably Greece and Italy, want a softer line. May will remind her fellow 27 leaders the threat from the east will continue long after Britain leaves the bloc next year. And the Trump administration plans to announce sanctions against China on Thursday after determining that the country is encouraging the theft and transfer of intellectual property from U.S. businesses. Let's join Oluwatoyin Yusuf for this and more on the foreign scene.
The Trump administration plans to announce sanctions against China on Thursday after determining that the country is encouraging the theft and transfer of intellectual property from U.S. businesses. The White House said the actions, which include tariffs as well as other measures, come after years of talks about the issue that failed to produce change. China said it was ready to retaliate with necessary measures. The White House is considering between $30 billion and $60 billion in tariffs, as well as measures that would restrict investment. Trade officials say the U.S. may also seek to bring complaints to the World Trade Organization. America's top trade negotiator, Robert Lighthizer, told members of Congress on Wednesday that the U.S. was looking to put a maximum pressure on China and minimum pressure on U.S. consumers. He said protecting intellectual property was critical to the U.S. economy. Meanwhile, Syrian rebels and their families have begun leaving a key town in besieged eastern Ghouta area as part of an evacuation deal with the government. Some 1,500 fighters from the Ahrar al-Sham faction and 6,000 civilians are to be transported from Harasta to the northern rebel-held province of Idlib. The evacuation deal is the first agreed since pro-government forces stepped up an assault on the enclave a month ago. A monitoring group says air and artillery strikes have killed 1,500 civilians, while at least 50,000 others have fled the siege on foot in recent days. The exodus came after soldiers and allied militiamen drove rebel forces out of about 65% of the region, cutting it into three pockets, one of them around Harasta. 6 people have been killed in an explosion at chemical plant in the Czech Republic. The blast happened at a Unipetrol facility in the town of Kralupy and Vltavo, north of the capital, Prague. Regional Fire Service spokeswoman Vladimira Karekova told newsmen that the blast, which occurred at about 9 GMT on the northern outskirts of the town, claimed 6 lives and several others seriously injured. Unipetrol is one of the largest oil distributing companies and producer of plastics in the Czech Republic. The plant manufacturers softened polystyrene as well as synthetic rubber for shoes and sports equipment. The cause of the explosion is not yet known.
And for Foreign News Friday, our correspondent is standing by.
Welcome to Foreign News. Spanish police have rescued 39 women and girls smuggled in from Nigeria and trafficked into sex work by a notorious Nigerian gang. Europol says the victims were kept in fitly condition in caves and intimidated with voodoo threats. Gang members forced the women into sex work in order to pay off a €30,000 debt. 89 people, including a famous but as yet unnamed Nigerian DJ, have been arrested. Investigation began when an underage victim filed a complaint with the police, saying she had been pressured into trafficking by voodoo trades made in Nigeria. Along with other victims, the girl was transferred from Nigeria to Spain via Libya and Italy. A report said the operation, which was carried out with police from the UK and Nigeria, is one of the biggest trafficking busts in Europe. A gunman is believed to have killed at least one person during a hostage-taking at a supermarket in Trebes, southern France. Report says the gunman, who remains in the supermarket, pledged allegiance to the Islamic State group. Earlier, a policeman was shot and wounded while jogging with colleagues in Carcassonne, a 15-minute drive away. He was shot in the shoulder by the same suspect involved in the supermarket hostage-taking but is not critically injured. France has been hit with several deadly jihadist attacks since 2015 and has been on high alert since. A state of emergency put in place after attacks in Paris in November 2015 that killed 130 people was lifted in October. One of the remaining Syrian rebel groups in the besieged enclave of eastern Ghouta outside Damascus has announced a ceasefire. The Faylak al-Rahman group said the unbroken truce was to begin in the south of the enclave at 22:00 GMT. It said the move would allow talks with the Russian military, Syria's ally, on guarantees for the safety of civilians. Rebels in another part of the area reached a similar deal. Earlier, Syrian troops have taken 70% of the enclave. The group, which controls the southern pocket around Afrin and Zamalka, said the truce deal was reached through the auspices of the United Nations.
And that has been the World News Review on Independent Television Abuja. Many thanks for staying with us. I'm Kiri Obulidu. Enjoy the rest of the day.